My hair is so big right now because it's full of secrets. Hey there, my beautiful foxes. How are we doing today? Are you having a good day? I hope so. If not, maybe my video will cheer you up today. Probably not, but I still don't know what I'm doing at the intro of my videos. Apparently, I'm not allowed to do a certain setup because it's like someone else. People get mad. I don't know. Hey there, my foxes, and thank you so much for joining me here on my channel today. My name is Imogen Hearts, and here on my channel now, we discuss conspiracies, urban legends, and, you know, just some weird stuff. Weird like me. I like to sit down here with you guys and talk about my two favorite passions in life, which is makeup and just weird things. If that at all interests you, I highly suggest you hit that subscribe button if you are not already subscribed, because I am going to be here for you on this channel with some really weird stuff. What am I doing with my hands?
I'm not sure what to do with my hands.
So this week's video is gonna be a rough one. I'm going to let you know right now it's gonna be long. I'm sure clicking on the video you're gonna see how long it is, but it's worth it, let me tell you. This one is one of the craziest I have personally ever heard in my entire life, okay? I first heard about this conspiracy, but it's more of a mystery with a bunch of conspiracies surrounding it. But I first heard about this in 2013 when my husband and I watched a movie called The Dead Pass. And I remember at the beginning of the movie, or was it at the end of the movie? Cool, good memory. Anyways, it had said that it was based on true events. And I was like, what? Now that was a really Hollywoodized version of events. So, you know, take that with a grain of salt if you ever watch the movie. But the underlying base story is very true, and it's bizarre to say the least. This one's a rough one, you guys. It's pretty rough. So I am going to, unfortunately, have to put a disclaimer on this video if you are sensitive to graphic subject matter. So here we go. Disclaimer. In today's video, I will be discussing with you guys some pretty graphic autopsies. I will be going into detail about injuries that the parties involved in this story endured. This might be upsetting to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Also, before we get started, number one. Yes, I wear these hideous spa bands while I do my makeup. I just have to. I can't explain it. It needs to be on my head. Secondly, I will not be discussing with you guys any of the products that I am using as I am using them, but I will have all of them listed in the description down below. Also, I'm going to be doing a body paint with you guys. You guys are requesting it. I'm going to try it. We're going to try it out. This is an experiment, okay? But I do need to do some prep work first off camera because there's no reason for you to see this part, but I will be back with no eyebrows. So don't get scared. Okay, I'm not gonna pretend like I don't know what I look like. I realize this is crazy. This is one of those makeup looks where you're just gonna have to trust the process, okay? So let's ignore this and let's get into our story today, shall we? So today our story, like I was telling you guys earlier, is literally one of the craziest I have ever heard, because not only is it an unsolved mystery, there are conspiracies surrounding this like galore. There's so many, and it doesn't matter what theory is offered up, nothing ever seems to fit. And in my opinion, this is just going to be an unsolved mystery forever. From an avalanche to government cover-ups to UFO attacks to even the fuzzy great white himself, the Yeti, being offered up as theories, nothing is ever truly going to fit inside this unsolved mystery, and no one will ever know what happened in 1959 on the snowy slopes of height 1079 in the Ural Mountains of Russia, which is now known as the Dyatlov Pass. I just realized that my lights aren't even on. Cool. So grab a seat, buckle up, get some popcorn if you like, because this one, my boxes, is a wild ride. So in late 1958, a man by the name of Igor Dyatlov actually started planning a skiing expedition. Now this would be a 16-day cross-country skiing trip that would go through the Ural Mountains of Russia. This trip would actually take them 350 miles north of Listen, there are a lot of Russian words in this one, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce them. And I don't want to offend anyone because of my lack of being bilingual or knowing how to say words in Russian. So I'm going to say a lot of them just as the first letter and then have them on screen so I don't offend anyone, because I'm going to butcher every single one of these, okay? It took me forever to even be able to say the main guy's name, okay? This place where this trip would take them is actually territory of the Maasai, which was actually the indigenous people like local to that area. This trip would actually be a 200-mile adventure that was on a route that no Russian had ever taken before. Dyatlov actually put together a group of 10 people, and these people were all members of the UPI Sports Club, which was Ural Polytechnic Institute, and these people all were either members or at least past alumni of UPI. Now, everyone going on this trip was what was known as grade 2 hikers, and actually upon completing this trip, they would actually advance into being grade 3 hikers. Now, this was actually the highest level and the most prestigious in the Soviet Union. So all of these hikers are incredibly experienced. On January 23rd of 1959, the group of hikers set off on their journey. So the group started by taking a train to Ivdel, which was actually like a Stalin era type prison camp, but at the time it just housed mostly criminals. They then took a bus and then skied the rest of the way to their next destination, which was in the second north. Now, this is where they would actually lose one of their members. Yuri Yudin was one of the 10 that originally set out on the trip, and he actually had to turn back and go home because of an existing condition. He had some like joint pain, and then he had a flare-up of his sciatic nerve, I guess. So not wanting to slow the rest of the group down, he decided to part ways with them. And now, knowing what we know, this ultimately did save Yuri Yudin's life. So now Yuri Yudin, he heads home, and the rest of the 9 press forward. Now, the plan was to travel to a tiny town called Vizhal, and they would end up there around the 12th of February. When they would arrive there, their plan was to send a telegram back to the UPI Sports Club, you know, letting them know that they made it there safe. That telegram would never come through. So now the group is setting off, and they are leaving Yuri Yudin, and they would actually hike to a mountainside which was known as Height 1079. And the Maasai, you know, the indigenous people that was their area, they would actually call this place Dead Mountain. So cool. Now, officials believed that they made it there that night, either on the 1st or the 2nd of February. They set up their tent by actually cutting into the snow, making the snow stable, and also, you know, kind of protecting them against the harsh winds that were there. So they're nice and safely tucked into the mountainside, and they actually went ahead and set up their tent. They put away all of their things. Everything was kind of nice and neatly put away. Their boots, their ski equipment, all of that was nicely organized and put along either side of the door. You know, the door to the tent, if that's a door, yeah. I don't know why that was weird. All their skiing equipment is arranged on either side of the tent. Their belongings, their clothes, their cameras, their journals, all of that type of stuff was also put away. And it looked like they had actually set out food for essentially like supper, I guess. And they also had wood all cut and stacked for the wood burning fireplace thing. Stove. Wood burning stove. I'm doing good. Just the basic easy words. You know, I'm messing up on those, and I'm expected to say names. Now, what happened next that night on that mountainside? No one will ever truly know. Now, back at the UPI Sports Club, they're waiting on their telegram, right? They're supposed to send it about the 12th of February. Now, the 12th of February comes, and it goes, and there's no telegram. At first, the UPI Sports Club isn't really concerned because they're just figuring, you know, well, they probably got caught up in something, maybe something delayed their journey. It's not that unusual, so nobody thought anything of it at first. But as time kept going on, of course, the friends and the family members are beginning to become frantic, and they're wondering where their loved ones are. So they start placing phone calls to the UPI Sports Club and also the Bureau of the Communist Party. On February 20th, they launched a search of the 9 missing hikers. So several different search parties were actually dispatched. Some of the searchers were just some student volunteers from the UPI Sports Club. Others were Mansi hunters. Then you had local police. You had some prison guards from the Ibdel prison camp, and also the military actually did get involved. Now, while people searched on foot, you know, on the ground, the military actually did launch helicopters and planes to begin searching from the sky. Now, 5 days after they launched the search party, they came across the group's footprints in the snow. Now, they followed these tracks, and on the following day, February 26th, they were able to locate the campsite, the tent. But it looked like none of the hikers were inside. In fact, they were nowhere to be seen. So the tent was partially collapsed and mostly covered in snow. And so they went ahead and dug out the tent. And what they found once they dug out the tent was that the tent appeared to have been like slashed or cut open or torn apart from the inside out. Next, the search parties found what they said were 8 to 9 tracks in the snow. It looked as though all of them had walked, not ran, away from the tent. And it also seemed like, this is weird, but it seemed like they were all barefoot. They figured this because they could actually see literal toe prints in the tracks themselves. So they figured that they were probably barefoot or bare minimum in socks. One of the tracks actually looked like it possibly could have had a snow boot on one of the feet, but then the other foot would have been bare. It also looked as though none of the tracks indicated that they were injured or hurt. Well, they could have been injured or hurt, but no one seemed to be like limping or dragging their feet, anything like that. All the tracks seemed pretty normal, just walking away from this tent site. It's said that the search party followed these tracks 600 or 700 yards downhill, and that's where they disappeared into the tree line of the nearby forest. February 27th is when the search parties would find the first 2 bodies. K and D were found under a tall cedar tree in the forest, and there was a dead fire nearby. The 2 bodies, strangely enough, were only wearing their underwear. Now, about 12 to 15 up the tree that they were found under, there seemed to be broken branches above, like a bunch of branches had broken off. And at the bottom, at the base of that cedar tree, was tattered and torn clothing and also bits of skin. Later on that day is when they found the next 2 bodies. D and K were found further up the slope, and they were found facing towards the campsite as if they were trying to make their way back there. And they were both found with their fists tightly clenched shut. Now, immediately, all 4 bodies were sent for autopsy, and then they continued searching for the missing 5. Now, a few days after the first initial 4 bodies were found, they then found the 5th body, and his name was Slobodin. Now, he was discovered on the slope as well, heading back towards the campsite, but it seemed maybe he possibly got separated from the other 2. He too was found with his fists tightly clenched shut. He was found with clothes on. Also, the the other two headed up the slope were found with clothes on, but it seems that Slobodin was the one that possibly was responsible for the tracks that had possibly one boot. He did have socks on one foot, but then the other foot did have a black felt bootie on. Now for the next 2 months, the search group's efforts would be fruitless until on May 4th, when the snow began to melt. A Mansai hunter and his dog came across a makeshift snow den. Now, this makeshift snow den was found 250 feet away into the woods or forest area there, away from the original cedar tree where the first 2 bodies were found. So the scene was really strange, but still no bodies in sight. Inside the snow den, it looked like they had made some type of flooring out of sticks, and then there were also tattered and torn clothing on the floor of the den as well. There was a pair of black sweatpants, and it looked like they had their right leg cut off. Not the person, just the sweatpants. The right leg was cut off. I worded that weird, I'm sorry. And then there was also a woman's sweater found inside. Well, the left half of a woman's sweater. An excavation of the snow den actually revealed the last remaining 4 bodies. They were about 10 feet under snow in a stream bed that is always running. The bodies were found wearing what seemed like removed or cut, torn clothing from other members, and this possibly was giving away how they died, like in what order they died. When one would die, they would take the clothes off the deceased member of their party and they would then wear them. And now we have the autopsies for all 9 members of our skiing expedition. Disclaimer again, if you are squeamish, if you are sensitive to this type of subject matter, again, I am going to be going in pretty grave detail about the injuries that were suffered during this time for these 9 members. I am going to be going over each one of their autopsies because I do believe that it is very important to this case. So if you are sensitive to this type of thing, going through like graphic injuries, then I suggest that you exit now because it gets rough. Before we get into the heavy, are you guys with me still on this? Are you with me? Sometimes, you know, makeup is a journey and you just gotta let things happen. So Kay, one of the first 2 bodies found underneath the cedar tree. He had blackened fingers and he had 3rd-degree burns on his shin and his foot. Inside of his mouth was a chunk of human flesh, but it seemed to be his own because out of his right hand was missing a chunk. It seems as though he bit a chunk out of his own hand. He also had bruises on his head. He was missing the tip of his nose. He had frostbite on his ears and bruising and cuts kind of all over his entire body. Cause of death was hypothermia. Now, D, the next of the 2 bodies found under the cedar tree, he was found burned on the right side of his head. His ears, nose, and lips were covered in blood. Bruising was present all over the body, and on his hands and his fingers, he had some skin tears. Frostbite was present on both his face and his ears, and then he did have a gray foam present on his face that was coming from his mouth. Cause of death on this one, hypothermia. Now, Kay is up next, and she suffered frostbite on the fingers. She had bruising on her hands and her palms and a large bruise up her right side. Cause of death was hypothermia. Now, Dyatlov, he was the head of the group. He had abrasions pretty much all over his head and bruising all over his body, just like the other members. One of the bruises on his right hand actually suggests that he possibly hit someone. He had scratches on his right arm, and he also had blood present on his lips and his cause of death was hypothermia. Now, the fifth body autopsied was Slobodin. He had abrasions on his forehead and down onto his face, blood coming from his nose. He had bruising on his right upper eyelid, and also he had them on his hands, and this was actually indicative of someone who's been in hand-to-hand combat. He had bruising on his palms and on both of his legs, and his cause of death was ruled as hypothermia. Now we have the autopsies of the final four, and this is where it really gets bizarre and gruesome, guys. First was D, and possibly the strangest one. Bear with me, but she was missing her tongue, her eyes, and then most of the tissue around her eye was missing as well. Now, this exposed the bone there around the eye. Her nose was broken and flattened. Her ribs on her left side were broken, and then her upper lip was missing. She had massive hemorrhaging in her heart, and she had bruising on her left thigh, and finally damaged tissue on her temporal bone. Cause of death on this one was the hemorrhaging in the heart as well as internal bleeding. Z's eyes were missing, and the tissue around the left eyebrow was also missing, and this would expose his bone. He had broken ribs on his right side, and then he also had a pretty big abrasion on his right side as well that would leave his ribs or his bones on that side exposed as well. Cause of death was internal bleeding and multiple rib fractures. K, as strange as this one sounds, was actually completely missing his eyebrows. His skull bone was exposed. His nose was broken, and there was actually a wound, an open wound found behind his ear, and his neck was deformed or broken, and there was actually bleeding under the skin of his left knee. Cause of death on this one was, it's weird. I don't even know if this is professional, like a professional explanation, but it just says his cause of death was from low temperatures, exposure to low temperatures. Hypothermia, but wouldn't you just say that? I don't know. I don't understand that one. That's a lot of powder. Now, our last body was from TB, and essentially his skull was crushed. He had bruising to his upper lip, and he also had hemorrhaging in his lower forearm and his left side. He had bruising on his upper lip, and he had hemorrhaging on his left forearm and I believe on his right side. Cause of death was ruled, well, they really didn't have one for this one either. It wasn't clear, but I guess the crushed skull was the reasoning, was how he died. So now that is the autopsies for all 9 members of our ski trip. I know it's a lot to take in, and it's pretty brutal. And to say that these autopsies were butchered is, gosh, it's an understatement. There is something very, very strange going on with these autopsies, and I think it's worth mentioning because I think that if the autopsies had been done properly, I feel like it would have provided quite a bit of information in this case. But there are a few things that are in this case that I feel like aren't mentioned or talked about enough. I have watched countless videos on this particular case, and I found some things during my research which I feel like are not in a lot of the videos or articles that I read about, and I found them just really, really interesting. And so I want to go over those with you guys. Number one, several of the bodies that had injuries, the injuries were actually consistent or were sustained during like hand-to-hand combat, like fighting. And more importantly, the injuries that were inflicted were pretty common with special forces. These are injuries that a special force operative would actually do whatever during combat. For example, Kay's body was found with the neck snapped or broken, and also he had a pretty big gash on the side of his head behind his ear. Now, these are very common or indicative of a special forces operative to perform or take out on their victims. Another example was on D's autopsy. Remember I mentioned that they found a gray foam coming from his mouth? This particular gray foam would give doctors reason to believe that there was significant pressure on his chest cavity before death. This was actually very common as a forceful means of interrogation by the NKVD, which was Stalin's secret police or special forces. Either way you look at it, these things were pretty much completely ignored on the autopsies. Two, the final 4 victims had just incredibly vague autopsies, which is just incredibly disturbing because it's just unheard of in the practice of pathology to be that vague about someone's autopsy. For example, D's tongue being reported missing. Now, that's a huge organ to be missing and just have no explanation as to why. And there's a very big difference between like biting off the tip of your tongue versus having your entire tongue missing. If it was just the tip of the tongue, it could be, you know, more related to possibly biting it off during a fall or just due to the crazy conditions they were in. She ended up biting off her tongue. Who knows? But having it completely missing is another thing. It also doesn't say whether it looks like it was bitten off, whether it was taken out with a sharp instrument, whether it looked like a scavenger had bitten it off like piece by piece. It has zero information whatsoever. It just says tongue missing. Writing such a vague autopsy like this one is, like I said, it's just unheard of in the profession of pathology. Even a student who is learning pathology and how to become a coroner or a mortician, what is that? The person who autopsies these bodies, it's just unheard of for a student, let alone a veteran, seasoned professional who's been doing this for years. It's just not a thing. It just doesn't happen. I mean, that's pretty suspicious, is it not? Just me? Just me? All right. 3, the main explanation that a lot of people give as to why the tongue is missing, the eyes are missing, is because of scavengers, like animal scavengers, whether that be fish because they were found in a riverbed or small birds, etc. That is the reasoning given behind why these things are missing. However, upon hearing other pathologists' opinions, guys, believe me, I went through and like looked at this 100 different ways, and I also wanted to get the opinions of other pathologists, like what they thought, because I clearly am not a pathologist and I don't know. But after seeing their opinions on this, it looks as though, because if you look at the bodies as they are on the autopsy tables and stuff, it doesn't seem as though there are any other, I mean, I know they have like a little bit of tissue missing around the eyes, sockets, etc., but there's no like pecking marks. There's no other like abrasions or claw marks or nail marks or anything on the skin, which would be present if a crow or a fish, they wouldn't just like politely open your mouth and take your tongue out. There would be a lot more abrasions, scratches, wounds around these areas because they're pickers. They would pick away at it versus, again, just politely taking your eyeball out. I mean, you know what, do you see what I'm saying? It doesn't seem all that likely. I hope that all makes sense and you get what I'm trying to say, but I just thought, I mean, for me, that's one of the weirdest parts of this particular case, and it's just not really explained at all. And the only explanation that people really give is, well, you know, it's scavengers did it. But then again, that doesn't seem to be the case, because the wounds or the lack of wounds doesn't really support that theory. Now, 4, I don't really have a number 4, okay? But it just really bothers me. It's very strange to me how these autopsies were done. This was one of the most interesting for me on this particular case, because I feel like nobody really talks about how butchered these truly were, and they were butchered. Let's not get that wrong. They were. But it seems to me, and this is just me sprinkling my opinion all over this, but it seems to me like they were told not to be descriptive, or told to be vague, or told to leave out information for one reason or another. They were told to do this, and that's why they did it. I don't know. Again, that is just my opinion, but it really just seems that way to me. Also, something that we have not talked about yet is the fact that all 9 members of the skiing expedition, they had their clothes sent and tested for radiation. Now, this was strange. Even the guy testing for the radiation was like, why? But it was tested, and their clothing did show high levels of radiation. This was just really odd, because it's not really common practice to test for levels of radiation. It's just not. Like, typically you don't get a body in and you're like, test her for radiation. It's just, that's weird. Anyways, they did find radiation on the bodies, and they did say that if they had found the bodies sooner, that they would probably have exhibited higher levels of radiation than they did at the time of the autopsy, or at the time of the autopsy of the clothes. I know, I'm special. I made that special. That didn't need to be special, but it was. Also, later on at the scene where the bodies were found, there was a big hunk or shard of metal that was found that seemed to be from like a military missile of some sort, and it too was positive for high levels of radiation. Also, I do want to mention that on all 9 of the bodies, the toxicology reports showed that there were no drugs or alcohol in their systems. In fact, before the group left on this trip, they had banned any type of drugs, alcohol, even cigarettes, because this journey was going to be so dangerous and they didn't want any distractions on the trip. So they weren't even allowed to bring them with them. So now we have the autopsies of all 9 members, and an investigation is underway. There are some really strange, bizarre occurrences. I think everyone can agree on that. And you would think that a case like this is really going to take some time, because there's a whole lot to investigate, right? And again, really bizarre occurrences. There are a lot of pieces to this particular puzzle, and it's going to take a lot of time to fit those pieces together and try to form a cohesive or even semi-cohesive theory as to what happened to these 9 hikers. But abruptly, on May 28th, only 20 days after the last 4 bodies were found or located, they just closed the case. Ivanov was the name of the investigator or prosecutor on this case, and he just closed it. And this left family and friends absolutely furious. Duh. I mean, okay, 20 days and you're closing the case. And his job, however, was not to find out what happened. No. His job was just to find out if a crime had been committed, and seemingly no crime had been committed at the scene, and so he had no choice but to close the case. But his very last statement was, "It should be concluded that the cause of the demise of the hikers was an overwhelming force which they were unable to overcome." Which, wow. Thanks, guy. But this also may have not been his choice either, because in 1990, Ivanov had an article that he released, or was released, on him. He actually, at the time of the case, had been pressured to not include any of his opinions or views on the case. He was pressured to just close it. You see, because in this particular case, it was very well documented. This crew of 9 hikers actually documented pretty much their every movement with cameras and journals. They were taking pictures constantly. They were logging everything as it was happening. And there was just a lot there to dissect and go through. Now, Ivanov actually explained that on one of the cameras, one of the last actual pictures taken on that camera was what seemed like balls of light or flares in the sky, and it was against a black background, so they're assuming it was at night, and the picture was like of the night sky. Also, at the time of his investigation, he says that there were some very, very bizarre burn marks in the trees, which to him confirmed that some kind of like heat ray, or what he said was just a powerful force, was used against the 9 hikers. But that he was not allowed to include this in any of his reports of the investigation. So no one knew this. So cool. Now, since the conclusion of this case in 1959, there has been speculation. Let me tell you, the theories surrounding this one are just, they're endless. You won't find an end to them. There are so many. But unfortunately, I am gonna have to wrap this up. I gotta do my lips and all that jazz, and we're gonna wrap this bad boy up. I asked you guys on Instagram if you wanted this broken down into 2 and 2-1. So give me a second and we're gonna wrap this up. Ooh, God, I hope I am in frame. You're not. You're not in frame. What are you, blind? I'm blind right now because, you know, contacts and stuff. Okay, so if you guys are interested in hearing all of the different theories surrounding the Dyatlov Pass, then you're gonna want to hang in there, because we're not going to talk about them today. Sorry. You're gonna want to hang in there for next week's video. We're gonna go over all the different theories. Aliens, Yetis, and all the evidence and things to back these up. Well, there's evidence, but there's like evidence for everything. It's weird. Military attacks. Maybe they stumbled upon some secret military base they weren't supposed to. There's a lot of theories, okay? And also in 2019, they reopened the case and have a new theory. I call it a theory because, well, if you watch next week, we'll get there. But I hope you guys liked it. I hope you like this makeup look. I tried. Okay, first of all, I just added the eyebrows at the last second because I'm like, it doesn't look good, but I also can't see. And now I really don't know if it looks good or not. I don't know if it would have been better without the eyebrows or with the eyebrows. I don't know, but this is the look, okay? Also, I think I made a mistake with the red lip. But here we are. I wanted to do a body paint with you guys. You guys seem to want to see me do body paints, and typically they take me a really long time, but this was a longer video, so maybe we'll do it again next week. I don't know. Anyways, I hope you liked it. If you did, hit the thumbs up button. If you like the story, hit the thumbs up button too. I feel insane because I can't see. I feel like a crazy person. Share, subscribe. I love you guys. If you are interested in all the theories, make sure you watch next week. I'll be coming to you next week with a new look and the conclusion to our story, conspiracy, mystery. But I don't think there's anything else for me to say here. So, well, okay, bye.